Hello, everyone. I'm welcoming Chantal for our 1000 download party for the podcast. Super, super excited. And I have a special announcement before we even start. We've reached 991. So we're only 9 downloads away from the thousands, which is super exciting. So, Chantal, welcome. You were a guest on the podcast was it March or April? I think it was March.
It was
Uh,
March. Mm.
a lot has happened in your world since then, I know, and we're going to ask you for an update. But before we start, I also wanted to tell you that your ears must have rung yesterday because I recorded another video with another guest, and she was raving about the episode we did together about toxic positivity. So
Great.
this episode is now live on YouTube. If you want to go and have a look at it, there's a special playlist called, I think it's called 1000 download party or something like that. Jose is already there. You'll be there very soon, Chantal. I'm releasing one episode per week on YouTube for 6 weeks. So there'll be 6 episodes with very, very special guests. So we've decided to do things a little bit different. And in that, as much as I've asked guests to listen to some episodes, they had a whole list of the episodes to choose from the menu almost. And so that we could discuss the content and take it a bit further, because apart from the time when I actually interview people, the rest of the time it's just me babbling away. After obviously doing some research, but it's a one person's point of view. So I'm always interested in having other people's input, their feedback, how can things be improved, and possibly as well, maybe from Chantal, maybe for someone else, some ideas on what you'd like to hear me talk about in future episodes. So, Chantal, let's dive in.
As we do, Ange.
Yeah, we're freestyling. Normally, I have a couple of questions prepared ahead of time. Not this time, so this is going to be fun. And you've chosen 3 episodes. The interview with Nimisha Kantaria called about mindfulness, sorry. The one about setting intentions, which I believe was the January one, like the very beginning of the year. And divine timing, which is one that I did fairly recently. So I'll probably pop the links to these 3 episodes in the show notes so that people can go and listen to them if that's piqued their curiosity. I'm also going to apologize for people watching on the video that I'm going to take notes, so that's easier for me to write the blurb for the recording. So I might not always look at the camera, but Chantal will make up for me by being completely on the ball. All right, let's do this. Which one do you want to start with? Shall we start with Nimisha?
Yes, we can do that. But before we start, Ange, I find a bit of an irony, or had a giggle, where you are always prepared, I'm not. And for the first time round, I'm prepared, you're not. Well, from a point of view of asking questions. So
I'll take it.
That. But I love it, as you know, because that's how I hold my conversations, is a lot more free flow.
Yeah.
It's just different styles. So I'm just having a little giggle here. And
what is it called in English? In French, we say that the person who watered the plants is getting watered, but
yes,
I don't know
right.
what the equivalent would be in English. Anyway, we'll find this expression at some point.
It'll come.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
L'arroseur arrosé, for those who know French. It's a really lovely, lovely expression. Okay, go ahead, Chantal.
Now, when I listened to Nimisha, I can't even read my writing. What was her surname again?
I think it's Kantaria, but I'm very aware that I might not pronounce it correctly. So apologies to Nimisha if she's listening. Yes. We love you very much. We're just very ignorant. So I'm so sorry if we got it wrong.
Likewise. But you know what I really liked about her, because we've talked about mindfulness, you and I, for a long time, and I've been practicing mindfulness, but I was really curious to hear someone else's journey to mindfulness that was different. And what piqued me, which I was thinking about, why would it pique me? Because she was a surgeon versus someone who isn't, or every day you know, what is it about our society or me who, oh, she's a surgeon, I'll listen to what she has to say around mindfulness. And I suppose part of that was because we have an expectation of how people should be, need to be in our society. And I suppose coming back to being a surgeon, again, this is my thoughts and my judgment here, is they have a certain way of being and how they've been trained. And for me, it often doesn't bring in anything like that's esoteric, alternative, different, whatever. It's often meditation. For me, meditation is for anyone. Mindfulness is for anyone. But there's still this point of view that it isn't. So I really liked listening to her story. And what really struck me was, and I have had this too, particularly in the beginning, she had, I've just read, she had, I used the word resistance, but one day, she just couldn't walk back into the operating theatre. Just something happened that she couldn't do that. But still kept going on and still kept doing. And I think this is something that so many of us do. Well, I definitely know I did, where I avoided, I resisted, it's not that bad. And this brings me then back to other things we've talked about, is that bypassing and ignoring how we feel, because we are meant to be a persona. We are meant to be strong and independent.
Yeah.
Yet here we are having something happen to us that could be perceived as weak or pathetic or not happening. So there's so much involved in that. And that's why her story really intrigued me or grabbed my attention, to hear how she had gone through. Plus, what I thought was really interesting, she started off with meditation. Then she had a beautiful child, and she lost some of her practice. Had the child, still something was missing. That's when she dropped into mindfulness. And I really love the way she described the difference between the two. So for me, meditation is more, well, some people don't like to use the word passive. For me, meditation is sitting quietly. You are still observing, doing things, whereas mindfulness is for me also being more, well, I suppose you can have mindfulness in meditation too, but for me, mindfulness is being more aware of what you're doing or what you're feeling. So you're more present, there's an awareness, where meditation for me is just allowing things to come to me. And I really love the way she explained that, and then how that supported her to be able to get back into her life. And I like that. And she showed the distinction.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. Keep going.
That's okay. What I also liked was that she realized how quickly, I can't remember what I was going to say, but part of it was, you can get out of rhythm, you can get out of the habit, and you can fall back into old ways of being. But for her, mindfulness really helped her deal with these intense emotions that you and I have also talked about. To be able to have radical acceptance were her words, you know, to really accept how you're feeling. Like, the fact is that she couldn't walk into the operating theatre. Something was really happening for her. And I know for me, when I have felt things intensely, I've judged myself, because society judges us. We're not allowed to have those feelings. And I'm going to take it out, even as women, we're not allowed to have those feelings. We're meant to be the nice girl. We don't feel those things. We don't express things like anger and jealousy and, you know, none of those things. We're meant to be, and I know I was brought up very much, you know, very, what's a proper, you know, you don't even say the F word, nothing like that. It's, you know, so you stuff everything down. So, you know, for me to even say years ago that I was angry, and even recently that I felt enraged by something that was happening here in Western Australia to do with domestic violence, you know, once upon a time, I couldn't have even, I didn't even know what that felt like. You know, I was so out of tune. So that's where mindfulness comes in. Because is it Zabit King who says, what is his name, Zab? Oh, I've just gone completely blank. I'm having one of my moments. But he said, we are often mindless, in the sense of we are not aware of what's going on in our lives. But then sometimes you can...
Yeah, so if you don't mind me saying, I think what struck me in what happened to Namisha, and of course we don't know what really happened for her, we're only speculating from hearing what she said, But
Yes.
it's almost like she had used her mind to control her body for the
That's right.
longest of time. And then one day her body rebelled
That's right.
and said, you are not walking into this theater, you are not doing it. And the body put all the
That's
stops.
like this. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's
That's
that's what I
exactly right.
saw as you reflected it back to me. Because
Yes.
of course, when I interviewed her, I was completely in the story and I didn't have that reflection back. So
Mm,
thank you for
mm,
that. And
mm.
yes, of course, we judge ourselves, and especially probably surgeons, lawyers, people who are trained to use their mind a lot and who are, I will say, control freaks. I'm sorry to say, but that comes with the
Yes.
job. And to think that you should be able to control your body should obey or follow whatever you decide to do. It's a very interesting dynamics when we get to the point where actually, no, we need to work in together. We can't work one against
Yes.
the other. So that's what
Yes.
I saw, rightly or wrongly. I don't know how Michelle will react to that discussion about her.
Mhm.
Hopefully, she won't feel that we're completely off the mark.
But that's right.
Um,
But I think also coming back, what I like about how you interview people, it's what us as the audience takes away from it. It's not. It's just this is what came up for me. This is how it related to me, and that's what I'm sort of like. I'm reflecting back.
mm,
How I interpreted it or how I felt about it, because I know for me it was when I was pushing myself too much. I ended up in hospital with a complete and utter nervous breakdown. What I realized was when I went back to the therapist at the time, I literally went like this, that my head was so cut off from my body, feel so in the thoughts, intellectual in my mind, that my body didn't exist. And there's various reasons why that's the case from childhood abuse. So I realized that I was only here, that my body was telling me, but
mm.
because I didn't listen, I had to end up in hospital. I didn't know my name. I couldn't sign the papers because I couldn't put the words together. I was so incoherent. And I don't even remember the nurse that came in when she came in a couple of days later and said, "Oh, lovely to see you, more present." I was thinking, God, who are you? But
Oh
that is
gosh.
what we can
Mm.
do. Yeah. So that was what took me back to when Nimisha mentioned she wasn't able to walk into the operating table. So for me, that was my equivalent.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think what I see as well is that, and it's probably more prominent for doctors and surgeons, but it's actually very true for lawyers as well. And there might be other professions. I just talk about what I know.
Mm.
And being the daughter of a doctor, I know a little bit about it as well. Is that these professions go through boot camp to get to the top, to where they need to be, and literally they go through crazy hours. Sometimes that was my case. When you're in law firms, you're under the guidance or whatever, the tutelage of someone who is pretty narcissistic. I'm not saying that all lawyers are,
Mm.
and you're just being trained. And there's I think it's softened over the years. So I'm not sure. Not for doctors. I don't think that's changed much, sadly. But for lawyers, there's been a new wave of lawyers who don't glorify hard work, who don't glorify the fact that they've gone through boot camp and then put others through boot camp because they have, in this sort of
Yeah.
bullish energy of the
Yeah.
workplace. But it's so no wonder that the body is completely neglected in this because it's constantly battled. Your needs are battled. You don't have time to go to the toilet or eat properly or sleep
Yes.
properly. You're
Yes.
constantly on the go, and that can have a huge impact. So I guess I want to extend some compassion for these professions, and possibly for and soldiers as well. This is really rough, really tough.
Mm.
Um,
And I think also to a certain extent, it happens also in the general population. Because I know for me, I had to strive and achieve and perfectionism. So I kept going, I kept doing. So I think it happens there, but it's happening. It seems to be, it permeates all through society as well, to some degree or other. But I think at those top ones, if you want to be highly successful and in those professions, yeah, it's a lot more stress and push and putting on the brave face and being supposedly in command of yourself. Because, you know, if I think about it, when a doctor walks in or a surgeon or when I go to a lawyer, I'm relying on them. Oh, so what I have done in the past is I've handed over to them because they're the expert.
Mm.
You know, I would question certain things more, but that's a whole different thing because they have gone through all that. I want them to know what they're doing. I want them to give me that. And since I've changed and softened, I also want to see them with a softer side. I want to see them with more that energy and understanding emotions and a lot more empathy, you know? So it's that's where I'm at now, is
So what
wanting that more.
I'm interested in knowing, Chantal, and sorry if you weren't completely finished, is how do you compare your journey to mindfulness to Nimisha's? Were there a lot of parallels? Were there things that you felt were quite different? That I think that would be really interesting to know.
Well, for me, I think there's a lot of parallels too, because I can remember when it was my mother who introduced me to all sorts of things. You know, mum was really a renegade in her day because she's 95 now and I'm 61, you know, and I'm making those age differences because when mum first started Reiki, it was just not even in Australia for a couple of years. So this is over 30 years ago. It was really new and unexpected. We thought, oh, here goes mum on another one of her journeys. Yet here we are, I'm a Reiki master now. Then I was doing meditation and, massage and Reiki and all these lovely things. So mum then comes a few years later and said, let's learn to meditate. And I said to mum, oh God, not another thing. Oh no, because it was, again, at that point, still new in I'm going to say in the Western, on the society I was living in.
Yeah.
Yeah, something just went, you know what, why not do this? It was the best thing I ever brought into my life was meditation and the way the teacher taught us. And so in a way, he was my teacher for when I started meditating, becoming a meditation teacher. But when I look back on how he taught us or took us through, a lot of it was mindfulness because he was actually making us aware of our body. He just used different words at that time. It hadn't become what I'm going to call fashionable. It hadn't become like, oh my, everyone's doing this. He was very, he'd actually practiced as a Buddhist. He'd done his 100,000 striations and then he left it. But he was very much tuning us into our bodies and how we felt. It was only years later when I found all these words and was reading up and looking, because I always thought I'd never knew enough, you know, that I realized that's what he'd been teaching us all along was mindfulness, but also just to sit quietly and be in meditation. So coming back to what you were asking about with Nimisha, so I feel there were a lot of parallels because I came in and out. But when I realized it was a vital part of my life and healing, then it became non-negotiable. Then it just became part of my life. Yet another thing I will say, there's a caveat on this. When I first had my car accident and triggered into complex PTSD, I instinctively knew that I couldn't meditate, Reiki myself, or do EFT tapping. And only found out later why. Because it can actually trigger you. It can actually take you into panic attacks. It can actually take you back into the trauma. But I instinctively knew that. So about 3 or 4 years, I really didn't do much because I couldn't. It was just simply not possible. But as my psychologist began to help me heal, to go through the talk therapy, then I could start bringing it back. Because then what I was able to do was then feel safe enough to bring myself back into my body.
So can I expand on that a little bit? Because I think you have a very important point here with the CPTSD or the PTSD, which I'm going to explain a little bit more because I don't know if people who are watching this video know exactly what it is. So PTSD is post-traumatic syndrome, stress syndrome, which is very often experienced in extreme traumatic situations, such as being in the war zone, experiencing a car accident, things that, and because of that, most people don't understand that you can actually experience trauma at a much smaller level and still have these symptoms, because for the longest of time, it wasn't recognized CPTSD, was it? Whereas complex PTSD is something that happens through time, through repeated trauma. And some of it can be high, some of it can be big, some of it can be small. But I want to add here, it's not a competition. But it makes sense in a way that meditation can be difficult when you're experiencing that, because it's in the same way that your sleep is affected, because you don't feel safe. So if you don't feel safe, you can't relax. If you don't feel safe, you can't sleep. And if you try to force yourself, it can actually make things worse until you get the support to be able to do that. So right. Well done for following the guidance of your own body that said, don't even go down that road. Don't even do any of these things. And I think I want to tie that into, obviously, we're talking about the True Spirituality podcast, where we're trying to keep people safe. And this was one of the caveats when I think I did an episode on meditation. I'd have to dig in through the episodes where I explained, be careful if you have trauma, or yes, just be careful about these practices, because they can make things worse if you don't have the proper support. They can also help, but you've got to be aware of, I want to say the dangers. It's a too strong a word, but what can happen?
Oh,
yeah.
I don't agree. I think it can be dangerous if you're not aware, and if you are if you're in the acute part of your experience of trauma.
Yeah.
I think it can be, because I went back to the psychologist as I was starting to understand more about trauma and how I was going to support clients in that. And there was also, I was picking up through Facebook and listening to people that, oh no, don't worry about talk therapy, just do soma work, like body work, somatic therapy. And I remember having a real visceral reaction to that, because I thought, oh my God, if I'd done only body work first, I would have literally bombed out. I don't know where I would have ended up. So I went back to the psychologist and asked her, well, what was I like when I first started working with her, and could have been in my body? She said, no way. She said, no way. I just needed to allow you to talk. And that was actually quite a few years before you could feel even safe in the world, let alone in your environment, let alone in your body. Yeah. So there could have been danger there if it had been someone who, it doesn't really understand what somatic therapy is, doesn't really understand what trauma is. That could have bombed me out. That could have actually, because I was so dissociated from my body. She needed to slowly bring me back, and it was slow, because that's the complex part. Because I'd had brought in, at that point in time, everything in my life came together in that moment of that car accident. So the car accident itself wasn't serious, but it's what I brought to it that exploded everything in my life.
Well, I think we can explain, and correct me if I'm wrong, almost like a cup that gets full, and then it reaches a point where the smallest thing can tip things over.
That's it. That's it.
If I could summarize with a metaphor what complex PTSD is. So I still remember you saying to me, and I was horrified how your mum said to you, oh, your pathetic little car accident, and how you were overreacting about it. And I was like, I want people to understand that, first of all, we have different levels of resilience. So something that can feel really tiny to someone can be huge to someone else. And let's not do a competition. My grandmother used to compete over who had the biggest trauma. And she won it all because she'd been in the war and she'd been an orphan and this and that and the other. So it was like, you shut up. I won the competition. But no, this is not how it works. We need to all acknowledge that we're human beings, and that we all go through, I was catching up with a friend recently, and we were talking about what we're going through as mums, and she was saying, oh, but you're going through so much worse than I. And I was like, no, this is not a competition. Let's not go down that road. You have your feelings, you're going through your own well, I'm going to call it grief at that point, or difficulties. And I want to acknowledge that. I'm not here to tell you, oh, I'm so much worse than you are. This is ridiculous. But it's so much better for some people.
Yes,
people want to be better,
Yes. And again, I think it's our society. If you think of children, or eat your whole meal because there's children worse off than you, or all these things come into play. So your experiences are always minimized. So no matter how big your experience is, you're going to minimize it, because there's always going to be someone like your who's had it worse.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I think this is part of what mindfulness also brings. It's just to be in the present moment, to be in your experience, to stop comparing yourself to others and just focus on you.
Yeah. And one more thing I'd like to add to that, as you said, your experience, it's your truth. Right at the moment, this is your truth, and that is where it's at for you right now. And, because the other thing I'll never say again, it's perceived truth, because that's often that, again, that's minimizing distance. Your truth right at this moment is this. And I found for me, it might be later down the track when I've sorted things through more, or have more of a capacity to go back to see it was my perceived truth. But right in that moment, that's your truth. Whether it's illogical, logical, emotional, it does not matter. It's yours.
And it can evolve as well. We can
exactly
feel,
right.
And we shouldn't be ashamed either of the fact that we evolve.
That's right.
Because that's another thing that you can beat yourself up with, which is a very not productive. Yeah. All right.
I recently
just
to finish, because I know we've got. I just recently, because we'll go that later, I was around a beautiful group of women where I'm now working, and I said something. What's so exciting is that I now know I'm really through my complex PTSD, because my memory's back, this, that, and the other. And someone quick as a flash said, you've got PTSD. And I went, oh, growth, post-traumatic syndrome growth. And I just thought, how beautiful is that? Because it is. I have grown. I am out of it. I always have elements of it, there's always a little bit there, but I love that. I mean, a real growth period now.
Yeah, I think it's a real movement in positive psychology to talk about post-traumatic growth. Although we know, because we started the episode or this interview with that, we're not bypassing any of that. No. It can happen when you've actually embraced the healing process. And the interview with Eleanor, you're going to love it, because she talks so much about that. I mean, stemming from your own podcast interview, but talking about what she went through and how the real healing for her only happened when she embraced the body, embraced her emotions, and went to therapy. So, which is something we've been rabbiting on, you and I, for a while.
A few years now.
All right, so I want to make sure we can talk about the two other topics that and obviously I think it's a good thing that it's a good half hour for the first topic, because I think that's a big one. Yes. Let's talk about setting intentions, because you chose that episode as well.
Yes, and in a way that times in with the other one I chose, was divine timing. I think all these come together for me.
Okay. So why did you choose the setting intentions, and what did you get from that episode? Did you have an aha moment, a specific?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, completely. I was at that point where I was done with setting goals the way you meant to do it, smart goals and this and that, and be specific and goodness knows what else, because I've been doing it for years in my businesses, and not understanding that because I was going through trauma, there was a constant sense of failure, because when you're in trauma, you can't see a future, you can't move forward, you're truly present, you're in the immediacy of what's happening now. So for years, until I learned it, I kept setting these goals and kept wondering, why was it happening for others, not me? So that was number one. So when you sort of talked about it, because we've talked about this over the years as well, about setting intentions, you reinforced why I call it intentions, in the sense of the words you used, which I like. It's a lot gentler. So for me, setting intention means I'm still setting something, but I'm allowing it to be open to other energies coming in and supporting. So and you used the word co-creation, which I thought was fantastic. And it doesn't mean you just let go, which comes back to the divine timing stuff that we were going to talk about too. So when I could set intentions, instead of it being a goal, this is what I would like to happen. this is what I'm going to do to set it in motion. Then only then could I let go and allow God, higher power, spirit, whatever you want to call it, to come in to co-create with me. In addition, what that did for me was allowed the unexpected to come in, allowed something to happen that I hadn't thought of, allowed me to see. So this coming back to mindfulness, it was like something would happen. It's like, oh, hang on, I wasn't expecting that. No. Then I go, hang on, why don't I just sit with that and see, that was that versus this. I didn't see this coming. So for me, it really opened up a whole other world outside of me. And this is going to come back to the mindfulness, because once I started feeling safe in my body, not just in the world, then I felt safe hearing these messages. Then I felt safe setting these intentions. Then I felt I could hear these beautiful voices coming in. I hear them as voices, or I get nudges. And usually now it's my late father. Considering the violent life I had with him in the physical world, for him now to be my spirit guide is quite just phenomenal. So I know if there's a male voice, shortened to the point, that's my dad, then I listen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it's so now it's all, so that's how. And interestingly enough, I've gone back to the part of me I'd been before the car accident, when I would just say, right, I'm just going to move to Europe. You know, when I was living in England, Australia, I'm just going to move back to England. Things happened. Got to England. I'm going to move back to Switzerland. I didn't worry about goals. I just said, this is what I want to do. And it happened. It unfurled in front of me. So I couldn't understand why my world had closed down until I understood what trauma meant. So for me now, it's taken away that sense of failure. It's taken away the sense that I can't do it. I now know I'm on a good path. And not only that, I'd like, it's doing it your way, which for me was hugely important, was to do it my way. Yes, listen to what other people said. Just take things, yeah, that fits, that doesn't, yes. And now my life is unfolding in the most totally unexpected way.
So I want to go to this in particular, because I didn't congratulate you on camera for getting a job at 60 plus year, right?
Yes.
Which is amazing. Yes. I think we need to talk about it and milk it. And in a way, correct me if I'm wrong, what I see, because we've been working together, and I've been working as your business mentor for nearly a year and a half.
Yeah, but even before that, on and off, Ange, but intensely a year and a half.
And you had this desire to make a difference. You had this desire to support people on their journey of trauma. You had so many tools, so many modalities, but also your beautiful own personality and life experience and compassion and laughter, and it happened almost unexpectedly. And can I share that? Because you were saying, I'll never get a job, it's impossible. There was all these barriers that you put up, and I can't remember exactly what I said. Maybe you do, but I said, maybe, who knows?
She told everyone, she told me off because she knows me well enough.
And I said, why don't we open our minds to the idea that there may be the perfect job out there? And literally, you landed that job a few weeks later. It literally happened because you had opened up your mind to the fact that at 60 plus year, you can still find the perfect job that utilizes all your skills, but also your life, your lived experience. And this is where you are today, right?
That's right. And what was interesting, so going back to setting goals, and when I look back, it had been suggested to me by my accountant to find a job ages ago, like 6, 7, 8 years ago. But because I didn't have the capacity to see what he was saying, I kept going. So even though I couldn't see a future, I kept going. And actually, I didn't want a full-time job. Or in fact, I was told I didn't even have the capacity to have a full-time job. So, it's sort of hard. Then, as you said, age comes in and you've got the gray hair and all this sort of stuff comes in. So you just give up. So I was determined to make my business work. so yes, you're right. And then I was closed off. You're absolutely right, because I didn't want to drive here. So I put all my own restrictions in place. I didn't want to drive here. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want that. Wasn't going to happen. I didn't want to. I mean, God, when I listen to myself, but again, that's that mindlessness. That's allowing only thoughts to come in. I hadn't dropped into here to allow it to open. And when I look back how this came, and if we're going to, we can then come into divine timing, which is something you and I have talked about, because for a while they had such an abhorrence with divine timing, because it is a form of gaslighting. It is a form of not taking responsibility. It's a form of bypassing yourself, just waiting for it to happen. So when I look back, so what are we now? July 2024. When I look back, I reconnected with a beautiful friend of mine January last year in 2023. We reconnected on Facebook because then we interviewed each other. Then quite a while later, I saw that she was working at the Grief Centre WA. I thought, okay. Then I saw that they were doing a 2-hour free workshop. I thought, why not go to that? Because I could learn about grief, do something new, different. In that moment, when I sat there for those two hours, two things happened. I shared, which I never thought I'd do, about not being a mother, not having grieved, which is something you helped me with, and realizing I would like to be part of this organization. Had no idea how. So I spoke to the founder who was talking. She was so excited. She said, oh, this is going to be a topic one day that you and I are going to create together, is creating how to talk around the grief of not having children, however that might be. Then comes a bit long after, they're looking for volunteers. Administration, no way. Anyone who Ange knows me, no way was I going to do administration again after 27, 30 years. No way. I wanted to be the counsellor. So I went and got interviewed, and they said, look, would you be happy to do the administration? Again, something dropped in. I will do that as a volunteer. Why not? Okay, I'll do that. That's how it then happened. Then they got funding. Now I've got a job. That's it. Like you said, 2 weeks after it all, boom, there it was. Because even you said, which at the time, divine touch, I was a little bit about it, because we are being funded by a government thingy, and we didn't know at that point it was coming or not. And you just said remain open. I was thinking, oh yeah, BS, because it's a government, whatever. We can't dictate, and they'd already taken months for us to get there. Boom, there I am with a paid job. And not only that, it's okay, a bit longer than I thought, but further to drive. But I work 4 days a week. There's flexibility. We've all been through bereavement or some sort of trauma. We have empathy, kindness. And I realized in this place, so it was divine timing, because I could feel ready to say it was divine timing, and it was. And not only that, I can actually help more people. And the beautiful words you said about me, thank you, Ange, was I realized this is where I'm meant to be, because I do love people. I do want to hear people's stories. I want people to feel safe and heard, like I have been, by yourself, by my GP who's retired, by my partner, by my psychologist. How important is that? That when you pick up the phone, because it often takes courage to pick up the phone to say, I need help. And then have someone just listen to you and reflect things back, because I can. Then I can forward it on to the counsellor. So many times people have said to me, thank you. And I just think, how can we not be in that space in this world where we can't sit and listen for a few moments to someone in distress?
I think, Chantal, one of the things that I learned through my many years of exploring therapy, on both sides of the table, so to speak, and exploring these themes in quite depth, is that we're taught to fix rather than to listen. But actually, when you listen deeply, it has a bigger impact than when you try to fix someone. Because if you try to fix someone, you're coming as the fixer. You're superior to the other one, and you disempower them. Whereas if you just listen, there's a magic in listening. And initially you might think, oh no, they're just listening, they're not doing anything. Actually, that's not true. Listening is incredibly powerful, especially if done well. And so yes, the world definitely needs more listening.
It does, and I think it's a good point, like you said, because a psychologist gave me, this is the one thing she said to me, The most important thing was to listen. And she said to me, she said I was allowed to share this because no one knows. She said a woman came to her for 6 sessions and all she wanted to do was talk. And to the point where the psychologist was getting a bit frustrated. What was I doing? You know, what was the point of this woman coming? You know, because she was going to say at some point, look, are you sure you're getting anything out of this? Anyhow, the woman stopped coming. I think she saw her, I think it might have even about 10 years later, came up to her and said, you were the best psychologist I've ever had. And she looked at her stunt because you listened. Because this woman needed to talk and get it out. And then he, you know, to be able to make changes through that.
Be heard.
To be heard without judgment, with acceptance. And that's something I realized. And the other thing I found quite, I have a giggle, which is actually not quite the appropriate response, or also because it's also sad, that when people are phoning the grief center, they cry. So they apologize for crying. You know, it's like, if you can't cry when you're speaking to someone from the grief center, where are you going to be able to cry? So we have this inhibition again. You can't cry. You can't shed tears. You know, but the body, we were made. I did my essay when I was doing my clinical aromatherapy on stress. And the body, there's reasons why we have tears. There's a biological reason, as well as the release of having tears. But we're taught,
it's pretty strange that people should apologize for crying.
Yeah.
But they do, especially in the UK. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, it still surprises me.
Yes.
No judgment there. It's just a culture of that.
It's a cultural thing. That's
stiff
right.
upper lip and just soldiering on.
That's right.
Which might work for a short period of time, but it creates so much damage in the long term, right?
It does. Exactly.
So I had a bit of a giggle when you were talking earlier, and I need to explain why, because it might have seemed insensitive, but I have so many friends who go like when I say things to them. So
Yes.
when you shared that moment, I just had a giggle because I was like, yeah, here we go again. I've seen this before.
And you've done it numerous times, my friend, but I've had to come back with humbleness and humility because I trust you. We've got such a good friendship. So,
Chantal,
you know.
I do want to say one thing, is that I have sworn never to say I told you so, because this is such a horrible sentence that I probably heard myself too often. So even though I sometimes share unorthodox views to my friends about what's happening in their lives that kind of grate them the wrong way, possibly because it's not too kind to the ego, even though I try to deliver things in the gentlest and kindest possible way. I do want to share one anecdote around that. It wasn't with you, because it was a turning point in me plucking up the courage to say what I felt, because sometimes it takes a lot of courage for me to say these things. Because people want you to indulge in their drama. And I'm not saying that I don't listen. Again, I do. But sometimes I get these messages, and I will say from spirit angels, whatever you want to call them. So I had a friend who sadly had people put sugar in her petrol tank, so her car couldn't be driven anymore, and she was ranting about how horrible the neighborhood she was living in with, and all these hooligans, whatever. She didn't use the word hooligans, it's my words. And so I listened to her for a while. I could see she was very upset, but at one point I said, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm getting a completely different message here. And it was probably the first time I honored these messages that come to me that don't make sense at the time when I delivered them. And because I know that it's not my thought, because I wouldn't think that way. And I said to her, I actually think this is something angelic that's happened here. This is for your own protection. I have no idea why. And I had the courage to say it, which gave me the courage to say more things to my friends again and again.
You can stop now.
she literally called me the day after to say it saved her life because her brake pads were completely thin. So the fact that she had to take her car to the garage saved the lives of herself and her children. So this is why I'm sometimes quite passionate about sharing with people that not everything is always as it seems.
Exactly.
And to keep that open-mindedness of,
Yes.
even though my ego likes the drama, and I have an ego, Chantal, I like the drama too. Sometimes I want people
Absolutely.
to feel sorry for myself. I don't want someone,
Yes.
to say, oh, maybe you should keep an open mind. Get lost.
Because that's that bypassing.
Well, I think
Yeah.
it depends exactly how it's done. So yeah, I wanted to share that story just to say, at least it's given me the courage to
Yeah.
chip in when I get these very strong vibes that I need to give hope to
That's right.
someone, and after acknowledging and listening, obviously. So it's a fine balance. I think that's why I couldn't be just I'm gonna say just, sorry, I don't mean it in that way, but I couldn't be just a counselor, because I get so much guidance from spirit that
Mm.
it kind of almost negates the process of counseling if you do that.
Yes.
So I have to be quite
Yes.
careful what I do. Yeah. Right. So
I
we were
hear
talking
you.
about divine timing, and I think I've found words that work for me, and I don't know what words you found for yourself. So definitely divine timing grates me, because it's been used as a bypassing expression
That's
so
right.
many times in the spiritual communities. And I think even though Eleanor didn't talk exactly about that, she did she
Mm.
was for a very long time in these new age communities. So it was very interesting to interview her on that. For me, if we say perfect timing, it works better. It's because up to a point, we don't
Yes.
realize. So, for example, I want to give it a quick example, but of course, it's your interview, so I'll hand the mic back to you. But
Mm.
when I signed up an agent for my first book, and I was so determined, I wanted to have a best-selling, New York bestseller, whatever. I wasn't ready. It
Yeah.
was definitely the wrong timing. And so I can look back on this 15 years later with the wisdom of
Mm.
knowing that if it had happened to me, maybe that's what I wanted, but that's definitely not what I needed. And it would have
Yes.
made, I wasn't ready. My nervous system wasn't ready. I just had a newborn. It was complete madness for me to want what I wanted, if that makes any
Mm.
sense.
Mm.
So
Mm.
in that, but as you rightly said earlier, we're the only ones who can bring in the word or the concept of divine timing upon ourselves.
That's right.
Because if it's anybody else, it is invalidating. So over to you, Chantal.
Thank you. Thank you. Because I really like, thank you. Because I agree with you. It's not what you want. It's not, yeah, what you said was not what you want, not what we need. That's right. And it's
Yeah.
interesting you say that, because now that I'm in a different space and come out of that, the spirituality I didn't like being in, which is very different to what I thought it was. And I've come out. So I feel like I'm a reformed spiritualist, if you want to say that. So I did get caught up in that, because my pain in my body, mind, was so great. For me, I got caught up in that spirituality and divine timing, divine this and divine that. And I used a lot of things, tools to help me. Doesn't mean I still wouldn't use them, but I'm finding it interesting at the moment. I don't need to journal as much. I don't use my crystals much. And I don't use my oracle cards as much, which was interesting. Doesn't mean they're still not there. But I realized when I picked up some of the ones that I used to love, now I look at them from a different point of view. I go, wow, it's just everything's divine timing, divine perfection. But when you're in trauma, I didn't realize that at the time, because I hung on to these words that it is going to come. It will come to me, and I believed it would. And it kept not coming. So I kept believing. This is how it can keep you on this role of, in fact, a word I read when I was looking up is addiction, because you keep going back. You keep going back. You keep searching. You keep doing, is waiting for that divineness, whatever it is, going to happen. So, and I've gone completely blank on what I was going to say
Maybe
from
waiting
that.
for
That's right.
the miracle,
That's
like
right.
the
Waiting for
divine
exactly.
intervention that's going to put
That's it.
everything right. Yeah.
Exactly right. That's it. Thank you. It is, yes, you're waiting for that divine intervention. I'm going to suddenly be miraculously healed, or something's going to happen to get me out of this place. So you hand over that, and then you no longer you hand over the control, the power, the responsibility, and you no longer have it here. Then you wonder why it's never happening. Like, hello, because of course it can't. But at that time when you're in it, so two things: when you're in it, you don't get it, of course, because you think something's happening and you're caught up in the energy of it and others. But number two, when you are in a state of deep emotion, so trauma, grief, depression, whatever it might be, you will cling on to anything.
Mm.
So I couldn't see a future. I didn't realize that. So I clung on to these oracle cards that I see now that were really superficial. I realized. I actually don't know quite how to even word it without being really rude or really off center, because they did help me at the time, but now I see it so differently. And I think it's because for me, I'm a lot more confident in who I am. I'm a lot stronger than who I am. Not rely, what's the word? Yeah, on myself a lot more. I rely on my guidance in a whole different way because I'm in the picture. I'm not out of the picture, I'm in the picture. So I did a double whammy, because when you're going through that sort of trauma, you're out of your picture anyhow. But then I went into spirituality, so I was out of the picture even more so. So there was this very nebulous thing going on all through my life. It's not nebulous anymore. So now that I really had this experience again, and we coming back to, like, I very briefly organized a big fundraising event for my partner. And in the end, I ended up doing it on my own because the person who was helping us had to let go, then did let us down, but that's another story. And what was amazing was things just kept happening, Ange, because we'd set an intention. We did have the timing. We had to have it done by a certain date. All of me came back into this. It was the most incredible and intense and overwhelming experience. But I was back because I was in me, and I trusted what we were doing, and I trusted myself to be able to get for this to happen. As a consequence, perfection happened, perfect timing, experiences. But I was open to seeing, hearing, feeling, and acting on them.
That's beautiful. And if you don't mind reflecting back to you what I see, I think oracle cards, tarot cards, I still love them to bits because they can be there as a support when we don't trust ourselves. Yes. But now that you are reconnected to your intuition, now that you're reconnected to your own inner wisdom, now that you're back, you don't need them anymore. And you know, I will always have great fondness for these tools because they can be the thing that keeps us going and that guides us when we feel lost. So I'll never poo-hoo them. But I love that I see in you that confidence and that clarity and that focus that you weren't able to have. And that was none of your fault because you were in complete trauma. And because I've known you for several years now, probably 6 or 7, maybe even more.
I think more.
I see the difference, and it brings me so much joy.
Thank you.
So much joy. Yeah. And there's so many more people who have been through trauma who don't understand that they have, because they believe that trauma is something much bigger than what they've experienced. Because of that, they blame themselves for who they are, for not remembering things. I think for me, the hardest thing for my CPTSD is the memory loss and not being able to remember. And because you don't remember, then you don't trust yourself anymore. And that is so corrosive. It's so I'm not going to say soul destroying, because I think the soul can never be destroyed, but it affects you in your core being. And I want to give a message of hope for people who are listening, if that's where they are right now.
Exactly. I think it is a message of hope because, like you said, I had memory loss, concentration. I had no concentration. I couldn't even put the pieces together. That whole capacity was gone. So, like you said, it is, well, so used to saying soul destroy. It is destroy. It does erode your confidence, because it's like, where had this person gone? So, of course, these tools were amazing because they did support you. They supported me at the time. But I realized I'd also relied on them too much. But in a way, was it too much? Or was it just what I needed at the time? So again, there's no right or
I'd like
wrong.
to think, no judgment, but I'd like to think
no judgment.
I don't actually see them as separate as us. They're just something, there's an extension of us. So we extend ourselves into the cards that give us the message that we need because we don't feel we have it in us. So yeah, well, thank you so much for for sharing also your journey since we last spoke, and for all these wonderful things. If you don't mind, I'd like to remind people that we have a couple of more weeks. I think it's 4 or 5 weeks, that if they write a review for the podcast, I will give them my Relax and Recharge track, which I think you have. And I know that people who have this track really enjoyed it, because it enables you to relax and sometimes helps with sleep. And I'm also running a competition. So everybody who writes a review, and I'll add a link to explain how to write a review, because I know that's been the hurdle for most people who have listened to the podcast. In the notes underneath this video, you have until the 4th of August to be entered in a draw to win a half-hour session with me, whatever you want to do with that session, whether you want healing or you want just for me to listen, as we talked earlier, or if you want me to open your akashic records or whatever. I'll be there for you for half an hour, and you can use that session exactly as you please. So that's
just
it.
Before we end with that half hour, because sometimes I used to think, not for you, but just because I can do a lot in half an hour. Sometimes people think half an hour is not a long time. You know, you need longer. But your half hour, like even I know mine, is so powerful. Sometimes you don't need more. So rest assured, everyone, if you do decide to choose, I'm going to say when you decide to choose to do this with Ange, that half hour is phenomenal. You'll get so much from it. So don't think just because it's only half an hour that it's not powerful. It is. I know.
Thank you. That's also why I record them, because people often go back to the recordings several times, because it can be really fast and furious. I'm not saying that in a horrible way, but the energy is very fast, because the energy in the Akashic Records is super fast. It's like driving a Ferrari in terms of the guidance that you get. So yeah, thank you for that, Chantal. And thank you everyone who's watched this interview. I'll be coming back for another interview next week. Thank you, Chantal. Bye for now.
Thank you, Ange. Bye.